Lakes area, and there's abundance of water. It's completely different than California, and living here for the past 6.5 years, it's really been a wake-up call to how different even our country is within regions, within geography, and I love the water. I'm a naturalist. If I can do anything in my free time, I'll go to nature and spend time there. And so for me, water is a sacred place, whether it's the ocean or fresh water or a river. And so in order for my work to be more meaningful for me and for what I want to do in research, it will take me to the water, whether it's to photograph or to draw or to map or to experience, that's where I want to be. So that was part of the motivation for this new body of work. And I went to school for ceramics. I studied the science and the art of it. And with clay, it's all about process and material. And while I was learning and kind of proving my craft, it was all about what I could make the clay do. But now I would like my work to be more about what the clay does in a more spontaneous way. Knowing what I know, but also creating situations where something spontaneous will happen. And you'll see that in this series called the Prospector series of plates where there's slip over glaze and things are cracking and sliding and moving in the kiln. I don't know that these pieces will turn out as they do. I'm just creating a scenario, setting up a system, and then letting the kiln do its thing. So it's almost like simulating geologic change that would happen over millions of years, but that simulation happens within about 12 hours in the kiln. And from that series, that's sort of like the far end of the pendulum, if you will. This end where there's the tribute plates, quench, conserve, flow, conserve, drift, conserve. This is more of like a billboard for what to do. Conserve, quench your thirst, flow, and drift, and enjoy the water and be in the moment. But this is very much about material expression in a very controlling way, and you can see that with the text and the graphics. These pieces are photographs that I took that I had printed in ceramic ink when I was on sabbatical in China in 2019. So I have all of these prints to work with, the gold and the blue that I'm patching together and reworking into different ways. So that is photography meets ceramics meets typography. And there's many pieces in the show. I guess I'll go around and do them all because there's not that many groups, but I've put things in collections. So what I just explained, like the two ends of the pendulum, if you will. Behind me, this piece is called Ghost Water. And I'm really excited about this tile piece. These are remnant pieces from a commission I did of all white subway tile, but these were the pieces that were not flat enough or the right color. So I soaked them in cobalt dye. And the cobalt dye is filling all the cracks and the crackles and bringing out that what would be considered a flaw of ceramics, but in a really beautiful way. And it references a quilt in that it hangs on the wall and that they're remnants, and it's also free floating. So it moves a little. And this is one way to install it. But it also, there's a new system, and I love systems and ways of hanging. So this is on fabric, and it folds, which is very important for shipping or storage. But it could also be mounted traditionally with grout and everything in my shower, for instance. Before I made this piece, and I think this is the beginning of something, so keep your eyes out. I'm really excited about what's happening here and the ephemerality and the movement and the color. Just it's very natural, and it has to do so much with what's happening in the kiln and the glaze. But it also references like aerial photographs or the micro and macro, as someone brought up. On the other wall, this is sort of the conversation that's happening in the gallery with the installation, right? So that tile piece is hung in a very similar way, and it's more of a visualization of data. So you'll see each column is a year, starting in 2010 on the left, going all the way to 2021 on the right. And the water, so the blue part, represents each inch of rain that California received in that year. So the really high year, sort of to the right-ish, is 2017, for instance. The years that we were really experiencing the wildfires here. So it's kind of an interesting graph that it would be an interesting project to expand upon, but I'm thinking about data. Haven't really dove in too much with it, but I think that there could be a place for that in my work. And then in the corner, that corner to the right of the rain gauge, are some round plate forms that are on the left very abstract versions of landscape and rain and water.
Sorry.
And also another iteration of the landscape of the water. So more compositions, abstract compositions of the landscape. And if you can see them over here, there's some collaborative pieces I did with a fiber artist, Kiara Terry from Santa Rosa, and I make the ceramic frames, and she weaves her wool and silk and cotton into them. And her mission isn't really to talk about water as much as she harvests and uses local farms to get all of her materials. So it is like some of the wool she gets are from sheep that are grazing, what do they call them, woolly weeders in the vineyards. So she's tapping into the local fiber shed for her fibers. And I make many frames for her to be weaving in. So, what did I not talk about? The cups?
The cups.
The cups.
Is it clay, the frame?
The frame is clay, terracotta, yeah. Some are hand-built and some are thrown. The cups are the first thing that I made out of raw clay in my studio here. It's always a good place to start, cups, because people can relate to them, they can hold water and relate to the show. But they're collectible in that for me and many potters I know, like we all have a cabinet full of cups from our friends and people we look up to learn from, but it's something you live with and it's a very intimate object. So it's the cup that's held in your hand, it's the cup that tells a story, and it's the cup that will nourish you and hydrate you. And so these were made here in response to the Prospector Plate series, because what I learned from that series with overlapping the clay and the glazes, I took what I liked and then put that surface onto the clay. And you'll notice that a lot of the forms are very different. Some are tall, some are short, some are round. These are really about me just getting comfortable in the studio playing. It's like the sandbox in a way. Because they're small, I can do iterations, I can respond from one to the next, and it's just a way for me to work through ideas. So then the next iteration, beyond the show, I mean, I don't know, but what I do, my goals going forward is to investigate this tile work more. I love how it relates to fabric and maps and the landscape in a very geometric way, modernist way. But I also love the landscape using terracotta and porcelain together, using the inherent qualities of the materials. And I think this work also is definitely influenced by the people in the studio. Bev, who is my predecessor in the pottery, and Brigida, who's the painter, very gestural painting. I'm definitely inspired by the work made before me and during me, and also what's to come next with my teaching. So, are there any questions?
Kayla, I was going to ask on this piece here, after you soaked it in the cobalt, did you do a second firing with the clear?
Yes. No clear, just another firing to the glaze temperature.
And it melted, yeah.
Yeah, it just like fuses in there. Yeah.
Nice. So along those lines, you said in your introduction of this piece that the result would have otherwise been considered flawed, and yet it looks perfect. So could you point out what you consider to be a flaw?
Well, this tile's warped. It's cupped. So there's some of that. But it's the thing about this piece is it brings out irregularity. And that's also something that I want to embrace more, because as I said in the beginning, through schooling and proving my craft, if you will, it's all about what you can make the material do. But the material does other things, and if it doesn't do what you want to do, it's destined for the landfill. So if you can work with it and embrace that and appreciate that, that's why the series of cups is called Grit and Grace, because it's about those two things and kind of embracing that juxtaposition of those.
The result looks perfect.
The other thing to point out is there's two different crackle patterns. One is a really tight crackle on these yellower, warmer tiles, and one is like a bigger crackle on the whiter. So my first run, these were not white enough for the client. So those were set aside, I saved them, and then I reformulated the glaze to become a white opaque glaze. And then also the chemistry of that affected the crazing, which is like a thermal expansion coefficient. And so you get different crazing patterns. So it's very scientific too, but it just happened to work out that way really well. But now I know, and there's some, like this, for instance, this cup was supposed to turn out like this. Like the crazing here, but this is a different clay body. This was high fire clay, this is low fire clay, but no cracking. So it's that thermal expansion coefficient. So it's just something that potters and people that are, making durable sanitary ware need to think about, or utilize in a different way, leverage in a different way to come up with a different spec. So kind of like playing between those two worlds of breaking the rules or complying to the rules. Yeah. Any other questions? I love questions.
Yeah, I'm gonna get them.
So you made all the ties, the ties you made them.
I use a slab roller, and Tyler, my woodworker on call, he cut templates for me out of plywood, so I could trace the plywood, and I had multiple sizes, so I could scale things down and hand cut them. Yeah. Yeah. So there was a lot of this piece plus the other piece are all of my seconds from that job. Yeah.
Do you file them flat?
I whisk them up and glaze them flat.
Glaze them flat.
And you're asking a lot of technical questions, so I did want to drop in a couple of classes I'm teaching coming up. I'm doing one in Sonoma, May 21st. It's a tile class. We're actually going to break tiles and glaze them and glaze piece them together to make like art pieces. You don't need any experience, but this is that. And then I'm going to do a virtual class at the end of May. Megan knows about that. May 19th or
May 19th, 3:30 to 5:30 Pacific Standard Time. It'll be a virtual class, and Kayla's going to do a little bit of a deep dive into
this show and all of that stuff. Yeah. So really like inside out of this exhibition. Is there a question?
Kayla, I guess that more of a comment. And so in my world, what you're doing there is called dye penetrating inspection. So
Dye penetrating
inspection. So if you're looking for a crack in the structural part of the airplane,
yeah.
there's a dye you use, and it was developed on it, and it reveals. They say it reveals the crack. Right?
Yeah. That you wouldn't normally be able to see with your
Yeah,
eyes.
you wouldn't be
Yeah.
able to find it. And so it's a very cool, so that is one process. And the other thing, my brother's role is photography. And so then you're developing it
Yeah.
when you fire it, so it's like,
Right, because when I soak it in the cobalt, you can't really even see it. It's like clear looking.
so I think you're covering so much ground. It's a really cool process. And then also you don't know what you're gonna get.
Now I kind of know, I'm learning more, I'm getting closer to knowing.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's awesome.
Yeah, well, thanks for that reference. I love when there's other references to other craft or design or industry. Yeah, it's really fascinating. And, you know, it's really all about asking questions or asking what if. And that's what's really fun about the show, and all of you being here and being so inquisitive and curious, is that so many of my conversations have been about like, oh, I think that plate reminds me of the fjords in Norway that I visited, or what if you did this other thing with these tiles? And so I really appreciate about all of you here today, is your curiosity and engagement with the work. So I just want to say thank you, and I'm totally open to suggestions and curiosities, because usually it's followed by an apology of like, oh, I'm not telling you what to do, but it would be so cool if you did that. And that's really great, because it means it's exciting to other people too. So we'll be here till 7, and the cups are walk away by. If you want any cups, you can visit the studio, buy anything actually.
You can buy it on the.
Yeah,